Literary theories give us a different lens through which to consider a text. They're kind of like a mindset. It's how you prepare yourself before approaching a literary work. Much like how your mental state can influence an experience you have. For example, if you get into a fight with your partner before a party, you're much less likely to enjoy the party, even though the fight had nothing to do with the party. Similarly, if you prep your mind before reading a work, you're going to go into it with a certain feeling already. You're going to examine that work a little bit closer for different cues, and those cues are going to be different based on what theory you've got in mind as you approach the work. So today we're going to talk about how structuralist and feminist theories offer different lenses through which to examine the short story The Necklace by Guy de Maupassant. We'll use those theories to find deeper meaning within the work, but first we're actually going to talk about the work itself. It's about this beautiful woman, Mathilde Loisel, who was born into a sort of common family. She spent her days wishing that she was part of the bourgeoisie social class of Paris from the early 1800s. Fancy parties, solid gold lamps, and tapestries hanging in their homes. She never had any of that, though. She married a middle-class man, and he seemed to love her. He gave her what he could, but they're not rich, and she spends her days fantasizing about those rich people with paid footmen in ridiculous outfits. Her husband saw this, though, and he saw how she longed for this life, so he got them tickets to a ball. He bought her a beautiful dress to wear to the ball, and she borrowed a diamond necklace from her friend Mrs. Forrester. We can surmise that Mrs. Forrester belongs to a different social class because she has all of these necklaces to lend to her friend to begin with. For that one night at the ball, Mathilde feels like she's where she belongs in life. She's being coveted by the people around her, and she's among wealthy and similarly adorned women. They dance and they drink and they spend the entire night there. And when they get home, she's realized that the necklace has fallen off somewhere on their trip home. They're frantic. The author writes they're terror-stricken, and this is a horrible disaster. They have to basically mortgage their entire lives so that they can buy a replacement necklace for Mrs. Forrester so she never knows that they lost it. They spend the next 10 years in actual poverty, working their way, paying back those debts. They worked multiple jobs. Throughout that whole time, Mathilde would still daydream about that one night. It owned her in a way. It owned her full being. She spent her time wishing that she was something she wasn't. The story ends with them paying back all of their debts 10 years later, and Mathilde running into her old friend Mrs. Forrester. Mathilde tells her everything, only to have the friend reply that the necklace was a fake and it was worth about 1% of what they paid for the replacement. And that's where the story ends. We don't know if she ever gets the necklace back in return for all of her hard work, but you're left with just a moral, similar to the old Greek fables that they used to tell. The moral being something along the lines of being happy with what you have, maybe, or just be what you are and be that with pride. The story obviously has irony too, but the two theories we're going to study today don't focus on those things. They are something totally different entirely, but each one of them will give us a deeper meaning and a deeper appreciation for the story. First, we're going to talk about structuralism. It was pioneered by linguist Ferdinand de Saussure in the early 1900s. The preceding theories of new criticism and formalism said that words' meaning was intrinsically tied to what they were describing, but he said no. He argued that words are completely random, and they only mean something because we say it does. Different languages are an example of that, right? Where multiple different words can mean the same thing. Saussure said that language is made up of the signifier, or the word itself, and the signified, the thing that the word means. Let's take this word for example. These are random letters clumped together to make the word necklace in the English language. In different languages, we would say Halskette in German, or Chanlion in Chinese, or collier in French. Interestingly, we have a similar word in the English language, collar, similar sounding word anyway, but it means something totally different. A collar, if worn the same way as a necklace, would be sort of a form of bondage or oppression, and that exercise alone brings some additional meaning to the story because the necklace does represent a certain bondage for Mathilde. She wanted this necklace, she wanted this life. It's representative of everything, but yet it also changed the course of her life to a much more difficult one after she wore it. But structuralism goes deeper than that. It asks you to identify the structures and then examine their relationships to one another at a snapshot moment in time. You can choose political or socioeconomic or social structures, but for the sake of this discussion, we're going to talk about the interpersonal structures between the main characters. First, we know that Mr. Loisel loves his wife, even though it's never explicitly said in the story. He forgoes buying himself a gun and going on a hunting trip in order to be able to pay for a dress for her. And when the necklace is lost, he gives up all of his own money to help pay for it. He works extra jobs, and he allows his wife to still stay at home and work out of the home, essentially. Through this lens, we could almost view the story The Necklace as a love story. He's completely devoted to her and her happiness, and she, through circumstance or whatever, seems to develop a love for him through their shared experience, or at least a respect for him through their shared experience. Another structural relationship that we can look at is the one between Mrs. Forrester and Mathilde Loisel. They're friendly enough where one will lend the other her necklace, but not close enough where Mathilde feels like she can tell her friend that she lost the necklace. That facade that Mathilde feels like she must maintain indicates the lack of intimacy that's forced on the friends by this rigid class system in which they live. We could take a deeper look into the different structures at play, like society and the class system and the roles of women in that system, and that's how we're going to weave feminist theory into the discussion. Now, feminist theory emerged in the mid-1900s, but feminists have been questioning since the Middle Ages whether gender is biological or cultural. In other words, does your anatomy determine your hormones, your brain chemistry, and therefore your social roles in society? What if that anatomy is maimed or otherwise damaged? Has your gender changed? Post-structural theorist Mary Klages, among other feminists, would argue that none of that is true, and instead that gender is a socially constructed set of arbitrary signifiers that work to divide society in practice and in relations into the male-female binary oppositions. And then we place a value on those masculine and feminine components and create favor between the two. Think back to the arbitrary nature of words again. A word is a word is a word until it has meaning. Man has meaning. It is a person, but it's a gendered use typically indicates someone who possesses a penis, while woman indicates someone without a penis. Throughout languages, that binary is defined and delineated by a lack. That is, a woman lacks a penis, and she is therefore a woman. If that is the basis for language and understanding gender, then the whole social order is built upon women lacking, which creates a power imbalance just in the way that we identify ourselves. Let's look at it another way. What do you see when you look at this picture? It's a small child with long curly hair wearing a dress, shiny party shoes, there's some flowers in a hat. Did your mind conjure the idea of a little girl about to have a tea party? Perhaps you felt an instinct to protect this little girl, but ask yourself what part of the photo signified that for you. Was it the dress or the flower? Maybe the combination and interaction of all those signifiers working together along with your own social bias led you to that conclusion. That is in fact a picture of our manliest president, Teddy Roosevelt, when he was a child. He was wearing a dress and a flowered hat with his long curls neatly hitting his shoulders. By today's standards, he looks like a little girl, but at the time, he was just wearing the gender-neutral clothes that were in vogue. This more manly picture of Teddy Roosevelt shows him riding a horse, wearing pants, and wielding a sword above his head. Would Teddy Roosevelt be less manly if he were wearing a dress in that picture? If yes, then is his manliness contained in his garments and not the person or his actions? Feminists would, of course, argue that this is not the case, but let's reel these thoughts back in and direct them to our story about Mathilde Loisel and her lost necklace. She felt trapped her entire life because she couldn't live among the glamorous, adorned women of the bourgeoisie. She didn't work outside the home or contribute financially because women in that society simply didn't do such things. But if she were able to earn a living without fear of judgment, like she does toward the end of the story, she and her husband could have earned tens of thousands of dollars more, potentially allowing them a spot in that coveted upper class. Paradoxically, the upper class would never allow a woman who had to work and grind down her pink fingernails, as it were in the story. So even though the story is about Mathilde and her entire being is anchored to what her husband can or cannot do, he gets them the invite to the ball, he buys the tickets, he takes the loans to finance the replacement necklace. She's merely a bystander in all of that. Her actions are dependent on his actions and his social status. Furthermore, would she even have wanted these things if she weren't a woman? Nowhere in the story does it indicate that her husband wants to be part of the bourgeoisie or attend the balls, and yet it's his duty to provide them for his wife. Ultimately, he is the one who has to repay her debts to her friend when the necklace is lost. He's the sole provider, and while his wife makes sacrifices to help pay the debts, she still daydreams about that one day in her life that she felt beautiful and wanted. She's a prisoner to her station in life, which actually illustrates feminist theory beautifully. She is what she is because of the masculine constructs around her. In the beginning, she's gentle and beautiful because that's what men want. In the end, she's hardened and rough with a loud voice and badly combed hair because this is what she must be. Men earn the money, which controls their social status, leaving the woman to want what she can never have or earn herself. The reader's initial perspective and feelings toward Matilda are that she's irredeemable and selfish and wanton, but this feminist perspective allows us to feel sorrow and pity for her because she's merely a victim of her gender and the social constructs that imprison her because of that gender. This, dear friends, is how literary theory adds deeper meaning to a text. You have a story about a spoiled brat of a woman who loses an expensive necklace, turned into a love story, with a devoted husband, and love developed between them through working through hard times together. Or you have a story about a woman who's oppressed by her social class and her gender, making you feel sorry for that same woman you previously described as spoiled. That, dear friends, is literary theory.